Okay, so we talked about variables in the last tutorial. Let's change this variable to some string, okay? And we'll make this a string variable. So if we, for example, type in some string, okay, you can see that, and I'll zoom in because it's super important, okay? You'll see that there is some string, and it's of type string, and you can see that it is a v variable. So whenever you work with any kind of data within Xcode, you look at this here and you see that we have a string. Okay, now let's just zoom back out there. And when you see that we have some string, it says that it's Mammoth Interactive. Okay, so if we were to print this string to the screen using some kind of Xcode, we'll use some Xcode label, which we'll show you, it would say that this is some string because that is the data that's stored within the variable. Think of all these variables as little boxes you can put pieces of information into. And some variables you can put only specific kinds of data. Like integers you can only put, let's say, a red apple into, and a double you can put a green apple into, and a float you can put a yellow apple into. Okay? So if you want to, let's say, add some string plus some int, all right, we can take a look at this and oh no, it comes up with a problem. Okay, and you can see that problem here, and I'll even zoom in as far as I can. It comes up with this little hexagon, or actually an octagon sign, which is usually the universal warning sign. And let's just take a look at what happens when we click on that. It says binary operator cannot be applied to operands of type string and int. All right, so we need to just kind of move it around there. But you can see here that it says binary operator cannot be applied to operands of string and int. And if this is one of your first coding tutorials, you might say that makes absolutely no sense. But if you've been coding for a while, what it means is that you can't mix some strings and integers together. Okay. Now, if you come from the JavaScript world, this would work perfectly, and it would print some string and then some int. But this isn't JavaScript. And it doesn't look like Swift is going to go down that road anyway. It was looking like that when it first came out, but now it's not looking like it's going to do something else here. So if I type in some int, okay, and by the way, you can see that it is of type integer, it says -8, and that's exactly what it is. So we got some int. And if we want to, let's say, add 8 to it, well, we can do that. All right. Let's add in a decimal here. Okay. Well, that wording comes up here. It says binary operator cannot be applied to int and double. Because remember, integers are only positive or negative whole numbers. You cannot add in decimals here, and this is a double. Okay. So let's take a look at some double. All right. And let's add in 9. And well, that's kind of weird, isn't it? 2.3. Let's add in 2.3, right? Make it equal to 0. That's kind of weird. And 2, well, shouldn't that be an integer of some kind? And the answer is, well, it's not as specific as you might think. So in other coding languages, this would come up as an error because you'd have to type in that 9.0. And in Objective-C, if you wanted to add in a float, you might have to put in an F after at the end of that. But the way this works is that if you want to have that double here, like this, and you add in that something that looks like an integer, it actually converts it to double for you. Okay? And if we add in some double, and we add in some float, watch what happens. Okay, same thing, convert to double and float. Now, in Objective-C and older versions of Xcode, you had to convert variables and data all the time. In Swift, you have to do it less. But let's take a look at this here. Let's type in double, bracket, some float, and bracket. Okay, and it has to be the capital double. Now watch what happens. Okay, you can see here that it says unidentifier some float, and that's because case matters here. And you can see that it did change, right? So if I typed in some float, it's black, and that's not the variable name. The variable names are case sensitive, so some float. Now we look at this and it does work. Well, we've just added a float to a double. How do we do that? Well, whenever you want to convert any kind of variable, all you have to do is type in the variable type, so in this case a double, and then type in whatever you want to put in there. Okay, so you can convert it to float here. Now, something that's really important here. Let's add in some float plus we'll say some CG float. Right now, is this going to work? Okay, let's click the arrows here. Same thing. A CG float is not the same kind of variable as a float. It's a little bit different. It's a CG float. It's like the red apple and the green apple, etc. So oftentimes when you see that error or something similar, you just have to convert it to a float. You can convert it to a CG float. There are many different kinds of data types and variable types within Swift and Xcode, and oftentimes you just have to convert it like that, okay? So that gives you a good idea on what you can do with variables.